So Cloud EPC, as the name describes, is a cloud-based enterprise project management system that's been designed around earned value management. And so there's lots of different modules that we're going to be going over, and the demo account we'll be logging into has all the features and modules turned on. From a pricing standpoint and how we can deploy this solution to our different clients, we have the ability to turn off and on different modules and package very specific enterprise solutions for our clients. So as long as you have a browser and the ability to log in, you can, or an internet connection rather, you have the ability to log into the system and use the software. The design is very responsive and works very well on a tablet as well. And so when we think about enterprise-based solutions, you know, the first thing that always comes to mind is authentication and authorization. And so the way the system works is you have the ability to add users into the system. That is done through their email. When a user is created, they are given a very specific token that's emailed to them, and they have the ability to then create a password that they maintain and that's encrypted in our database. From there, from an enterprise perspective, our system really works as a matrix where users are assigned roles and permissioning, and so that permissioning determines what they can do within the system. And then the second piece of that matrix is which projects they have access to. And so as an enterprise administrator, you have the ability to really control down to which employees or users can get to which projects and what they have permission to actually do within those projects. You know, what I always like to say is if you can see it, if you can click it, there's a permission that is attached to it, and you have the ability to turn that off and on. And so, for example, well, that sounds complicated. What we've tried to do from a design standpoint is mimic our menu structure. And so, for example, we are within the menu of enterprise administration and access and permissions, and specifically within that permissions, we're under permission groups. And you can see that the permissioning, and I'm in the full access permission group right now, follows that same design. And so as full access, everything is turned on, but you can see from here, we can drill down from enterprise to administration, access and permissions, and then permission group. If I wanted to create a new permission for a particular user, I can copy this full access and modify this permission such that this view would simply be a read-only view. And so where we have buttons to add or edit or delete records within the database, we have the option to also convert that view into a read-only view versus a full permission view. The way our no access setting works is if something is turned to no access, the permission, or rather the user interface element, is hidden completely from the end user. And so that can get very powerful if, for example, you're trying to create a vendor permission for someone that's maybe not associated with the company and you want them to log in and simply log in RFI. You can create a permission specifically for that vendor that when they log in, all they see is the RFI module and the ability to add a new RFI into the system. Very similar for project access. You have the ability to select a project and add users to that project. And so this is where users have access to different projects, and then the permission determines what they can do. The first part of this overview, we're going to focus heavily from a project perspective, but the way Cloud EPC is structured is, you know, projects get loaded in the system. Projects have lots of different objects, which we always like to refer to as a module. And so we're going to be starting with the cost module, briefly talking about how change management works, and then looking at the progress module for earned value management. But all of these objects that are tracked within a project are also categorized and can get organizationally grouped together into our enterprise. And so a collection of projects becomes a portfolio at the enterprise level. And so if a company has divisions, let's say, those projects can get grouped into particular divisions, and then a lot of the reporting and the outputs that we will be looking at from a project perspective in the enterprise can get grouped together for portfolio-based reporting as well. And as we go through this a little bit more, we'll demonstrate what we really like, which is our pivoting structures. And that pivoting of being able to slice data and create hierarchies very quickly also exists at the enterprise level, where the hierarchy can get then created not simply at a project level, but between projects, or elements of a project can get quickly pivoted at the enterprise level. And I promise that'll make more sense as we go further in at the project level. But the bulk of the overview will be heavily focused on project. Just know that almost anything you can do at a project can get rolled together or aggregated at the enterprise. And so where I'd like to start is our budget structure within Cloud EPC that is probably a little bit atypical to anything else that we've been able to find in the market from a budgeting standpoint. And the reason for this is the parent company of Cloud EPC is Nexus PMG. And Nexus PMG works with a very wide type of client base. We work with everyone from the investor of industrial green construction projects all the way down to working with constructors of those projects. Our own in-house teams will often also design them, and sometimes we'll sit as the owner's engineer. The level of detail for that can be very, everything from a very high level overview of being able to do cost reporting for an investor all the way to assisting a contractor track progress, down at the ISO level, can lead for varying differences in level of detail required when you load a project. And so that complexity of needing something down at the atomic level versus something at a much higher level is what our pivoting budgeting structure was born from. And so if we think about a traditional WBS hierarchy, it's very much that, a hierarchy. It builds from a level 0 down to a level 1, down to a level 2. But in our world of having to report and slice and dice data, we needed something that was a little bit different. And quite frankly, what we needed is what most people will do in systems, which is we needed a pivot table. They'll take that data or take that hierarchical structure, bring it down into an Excel database or an Excel file. They'll create codes and then pivot that data into something slightly different. It's at the end of the day the same underlying data, but it's getting aggregated in a different way. And so whether your system is based on or mimics a cost coding structure in a large enterprise system like SAP, or you're creating just smart, intelligent WBSs that is getting created on a per project basis, let's say in a database like Primavera, which is a hierarchical database, what we have the ability to do is take that intelligent coding structure and parse it out into very specific columns. And so if you think about an SAP where, it might be E.C.C.CCV002.L, which is a very common type of nomenclature you'll see in existing large databases. What we've done is giving column-based context to each one of those intelligent codes that often get built up in other systems. And so that same example of E, where maybe that first one-letter digit would have represented engineering, maybe the next in that same coding, there's also for a C for construction. So C.C3.E CEL001L would have represented Hersig area underground electrical duct banks. By parsing those out into very specific columns and creating what we refer to as the Big Five, we now have the ability to quickly aggregate data based on that intelligent nomenclature. And so by simply dragging the phase code to the top, what we're able to do is look at and roll up and slice our data by what we're referring to as phase code. Now, in the back end of the system, when we roll this out from an enterprise, these are just our default values. So phase, WBS, discipline, activity, cost type could be renamed to, code A, area, organization, phase code, cost type, for example. There's plenty that we've built where we can help match your existing nomenclature into our system, but the idea of the pivoting will still exist. And so we can now maybe look at this by area, phase by area. And so we can see engineering boiler area, and we can look at all of our metrics and our budgets and our actuals by that lens, if you will. But where this gets really powerful and where sometimes we find a hierarchical structure sometimes falls over is if you need to be able to flip a level 3 hierarchy above a level 2 hierarchy. In our system, because everything is treated as a flat structure, we can simply drag the phase code to the right of the WBS, and now we can look at area by phase, and we can see that boiler area, engineering and construction is isolated, whereas before we were looking at it by phase, in that case engineering, construction, and then area. With a simple click of a button, we were able to now slice that data slightly different. And so this concept of our budgeting and our big five, as we like to refer to it, also carries over into all of our reporting. And so if we look at the same metric where we were just running a report based on, first I had dragged the phase column in, we can now pick that same report and say, or that same data element and say we want to look at this by phase. And now let's say phase area or WBS, we can simply drop in that level 2 grouping, and the system will go pivot that data and present the results by engineering by area, or sorry, by phase by area. We can also flip that data around, just like we did in the example in the grid view, and look at this by area by phase. And so now we will see the boiler area, engineering, construction getting isolated out. And so the coding structure is very unique to our system. We then have additional data elements and additional grouping elements that hang further off of this that we like to refer to as master data. And so let's just say one use case that we see often is the activity coding is very specific to your company. And oftentimes when you're working as, let's say, an owner's representative, or even as the constructor or the EPC contractor, you're oftentimes going to have to generate a report for your client using their nomenclature or their cost coding structure. Oftentimes it's quite a large pain to be able to remap all of your existing data sets into something that's very unique for that project. And so using our export to Excel coding and then re-import, we have these group fields. And so we have 3 that hang off of the activity and 3 that hang off of the cost type, but we can quickly remap these data sets into really anything we want. So let's just assume we had contractor A and contractor B, or for whatever reason for an owner, we need to go re-cost code everything by their asset number to be able to give them an as-built costing by asset. We can take our big five structure and recode it into our group codes. And so a group code simply gets assigned onto the control budget big five. It's easily changed. It's doesn't have as many firm rules around it as the big five. But now we can carry that same pivoting concept where we can look at, let's just say in this case, we're doing it by contractor. And we want to group this by contractor A and contractor B. We can simply cost code our existing big five structure into these 2 codes. And that same cost reporting now can get quickly pivoted into our group code. So in this case, we were doing a demo based on primary group code, and we can build up an entire new hierarchy using that same conceptual pivoting concept, but it lives outside of the big five coding. And we can also use our existing intelligence in our coding. So let's just say we wanted to see it by discipline by contractor. And in this case now, we'll break it out by civil, structural, architectural, and then contractor 1, contractor 2. So we have our budget structure on how we create control budgets. And then we have the actual values that we store on each budget and how we actually manage change within Cloud EPC. And that's effectively our the control budgets. We have our control accounts and then our control budgets. And in Cloud EPC, every budget object has 4 main data elements. We're in the cost module, and so we're seeing the view from a cost perspective, but we can simply turn on the other data elements as well. And so the 4 major data elements that exist are, we have cost, so we have hours, we have quantity, and we have revenue. And the way the system works is we have a full revenue generation as well, but those 4 data elements exist. There's lots of different ways to load revenue. We're going to leave that for another training video, but at any point in time, whether we're talking about a deviation or a change order, which we'll get to in a second, or we're talking about loading the original budget or the as sold, every data element or every control budget object stores those 4 pieces of information. And so again, it's the cost value, quantity, hours, and revenue. And let me just redo my view here. And the methodology we employ is stored in each one of these columns here, which I'm going to go over in detail. And so Cloud EPC starts with the coding structure of the big 5, and then the next real step in Cloud EPC is loading the as sold position. And so one of the things I always like to clarify is we take over after estimating. Cloud EPC, while we have grand visions of building an estimating module, currently does not providing estimating module. So once a project is won or there's an as sold basis for that project, you can effectively go code and then load that budget into Cloud EPC for managing the cost, managing the progress, the performance, all the elements to be able to effectively manage an industrial construction project. And so that's what we call our original budget, or your as sold position. And the original budget is easily loaded into the system, and with permissioning, we can control who can edit it. And so it's effectively can be done through Excel very quickly. We've seen existing clients actually drill this template and build it into their existing estimating templates, whether it's Excel or an export out of an existing estimating database. And it consists of a big 5, some data elements that we'll just look over right now that are informational, such as scope or a particular vendor responsibility. It then takes those 4 key data elements, which is hours, quantity, cost, and revenue. And again, revenue has its own revenue simulation engine, which we can calculate all types of revenue based on cost or all-in unit rates on quantity. We'll save that for another training. But you basically populate or cost code your budgets, hit save, and then import it back into the system. And it's just that fast where you can then be up and running. And then through permissionings, only certain people we typically recommend should have access to this project administration original budget screen. But through switching this permission right here, you have the ability to lock your original budget or your as sold position. And then from there, the system really works off the methodology that once that as sold budget is loaded, the only way to change your budget is through our change management module. And there's 3 primary types of changes that exist in Cloud EPC. We have change orders, or is represented here, CO. You have budget shifts, or represented as BS. And we have trends that's represented as TR. And the way Cloud EPC works is it tracks two major budgeting types. We have our current budget, which is a very simple math function. It takes the original as sold value plus all approved change orders through this change management module, plus all approved budget shifts to get to the current budget. Then from there, we have a forecasting module, or if you already are running a trending program outside of the system, you can just import from Excel. But we have trends that go into the system, and then current budget plus trends equals your current forecast. And at any given point, we can track our deviations and our variances against the current approved budget and also against our current forecast or where we think the project is going through our trending program.
So you can almost have a report on your current budget that you could show to your clients, and then you could show an internal current forecast report to your management.
Yeah, that's a really good clarification. Oftentimes, I'll get asked is why are we tracking two different budgets, and the way I always like to explain it is, your current budget is representative of what you'll get paid by your client. The current forecast is, effectively those items, let's say in a hard money fixed price scenario where you're either going to have to fund that either from margin or from contingency. Whereas the current budget will be an approved change order. A pump was added to the project, and so you're going to be able to recover that cost versus, let's say, a quantity growth where you had estimated, it was going to be 100 foot of pipe, and it came, when the design was complete, it was 110 foot of pipe. That extra 10 foot will be coming out of the contractor's pocket in a hard money bid scenario. So, yeah, that's a really good clarification. So when you're running those reports, and going back to the previous conversation of coding, let's say, to your client's budget, you can run a report specifically on just the current budget and hide the forecast from them, as that's an internal report versus being able to report off the forecast internally for management. And so that same data set is being able to be repurposed and used for two different problems, if you will, or two different reporting conditions. And that's why we have those two different line items, or those two different columns, rather. Yeah, thank you. Good question. And that same idea of the budgeting on original budget, change orders, budget shifts, and trends exists in our progress module. And we'll talk about how the progress module is a little bit different than the cost module when we get over there. Before we get into the actual values or the earned value, wanted to quickly just touch on change management as we think about change orders, budget shifts, and trends and how they work. And so in Cloud EPC, we have three primary types of deviations. And we have our change management module, which works and is heavily integrated with the cost module and the progress module. And so when we implement modules, the change management module is a big part of rolling out with a progress module, a cost module, or again, if clients opt to go with both, the change management will be included as part of both. And so if we were to pick one with some values, what the system does is it gives us the ability to load a potential deviation into the system and then create workflows. And so when a deviation is created, it is assigned in this case, legacy construction management workflow. And a user has the ability to load quite a bit of information onto the deviation. And so we can give that deviation a number, we can give it a name, we can give it some descriptions. We have to tell the system what type of deviation is it, so we know which column from the other view that it will show up in, so change orders, budget shifts, or trends. We would give it some context through budgeting, so just like when we loaded an original budget, we cost coded it to the big five. We're going to also cost code it to a big five in this change management module. We're going to give it, we're going to quantify it. So hours, cost, revenue, quantity. A deviation can be cost coded to multiple lines. Let me find one maybe that's already existing in the system. And so we can see in this case, it impacts multiple line items. So again, using the example of adding a pump, we have to design, there's engineering labor, hours associated and costs associated with designing that pump. There's procurement, which is a separate cost code for procuring that pump. And then the construction cost accounts for actually installing that pump, everything from the foundation to electrical, the mechanical install. And so all of those items would get cost coded here, and that scope of work would get broken out. Progress is a reference back to the progress module, which we'll touch on in a minute. Any attachments associated with that are also able to get loaded into the system and get workflow through for approval. So for example, if you have red lines or drawing takeoffs or just calculations that went. Those Excel files, PDFs, Word documents can get all attached here for reviews, and then they can get workflowed. So for example, I can approve this with comment on looks good, ready for, and the next step is in process for team review. We can go from this draft stage to, I'm going to approve it, to the in process phase. And now some other things just happened that we're going to gloss over, but one of the big things that just happened is an email was fired out to folks that were associated with each block of the workflow. And so you can create very specific workflows and create notifications off of those workflows. And so let's just say you're an engineering company and the project manager loaded this first potential deviation. You could workflow this such that every discipline will get a notification after the predecessor or the previous discipline had reviewed it. And so maybe the project manager sends it to the process engineers who review it, leave their comments, then they can move it on to mechanical or electrical, or it could be structured such that this is the engineering workflow step and all the engineers would be notified as approvers. You can see here we have 3 types. We have, I'm currently configured as a super approver, which means I can move in a nonlinear fashion, or we have approvers, and then we just have reviewers. So, you know, maybe the engineering manager is a reviewer, and then each engineering lead would be the approver, and the engineering manager can come in and leave comments on this, but the actual approvers would be for each engineering lead to come in, approve it, and, you know, for the sake of demo purposes, let's just put this in the approved block. And you can see that the system leaves breadcrumbs of everyone that had approved it, when they had approved it, which blocks they had moved from, so what place in the workflow, and then any of the notes or references that were created along the way. So there's a really good breadcrumb of everything that happened with that deviation. For the purposes of time, I won't go through it, but there's also a nice PDF printout that comes and organizes this in a form that can get printed and issued to your client for signature, which can get scanned and reattached as a backup as formal approval. Lots of other bells and whistles, but all of those approved changes, and based on the type, change order, budget shifts, or trends, would effectively show up into this budget table. And I don't remember which one I just approved, but I can promise you it's now showing up here as an approved change order, and all of these different data points are coming from that change order that I had just put into an approved state. I also probably have some emails that tell me that it was just approved. And that's how the budgeting works in Cloud EPC. It heavily leans on that change management module through workflows and through a baseline-centric mindset of loading that original budget and locking it down. What we really like about the system, not just the reporting capabilities or the pivoting capabilities, is also the level of transparency of what was originally sold by the estimating and sales team, and then every change that occurred to that budget value along the way, whether it was a budget shift, so we moved $5 from account A to account B, or the actual change order with all the backups that live on that object in the change management module that took us from a $10 project to a $20 project, along with all the trends as well. So, you know, using the example of pipe, the extra 10 foot of pipe that we found after design was complete. You know, from there, that logic gets repeated in the progress module, and we'll touch on it again, but that really completes, you know, what is budgets within Cloud EPC. You know, from there we have our actuals, and this is where our actuals and our earned value, and this is where it can get really interesting, because one of the things that Cloud EPC employs is a slightly top-down methodology. And so what I mean by that is the way we commit and expend against budgeted line items isn't often the way we work package and actually track progress against those work packages. And oftentimes we'll be tracking progress at a much lower level than, let's say, the subcontract PO calls for. And a great example of that is, let's just say we're subcontracting out our foundations. Contractor A is our foundation subcontractor, and they may only have 4 lines in their purchase or their subcontract agreement, and then they have in their contract to be able to track and validate progress. But the actual budgeting line items are not going to be reported in the same format that the invoice will be coming in. And when we started embarking down this journey of building Cloud EPC, these became 2 very separate modules to us, because we needed to be able to work package, advanced work packaging, for example, was a big term in the industry right now, but the advanced work packaging oftentimes does not align to how we're actually writing our commitments and our contracts to our vendors and our subcontracts. And so the need became pretty apparent fairly quickly for us to split those modules out. And everything gets cost coded back to our big 5. And so this idea of our budget table being the bank account, if you will, and then we commit and expend from a cost module perspective against those budget line items. And then we can also create progress items or work packages against those that's loaded with an estimated number of hours and cost based on our standard unit rates, and track progress against to create our earned value. We can bring all that data back up to the budget table along with our actual hours that we're spending, any actual cost, and we can create a comprehensive earned value system, but also be able to do the nuances of being able to track our committed cost at a contract level and our work packaging and earned value at a progress granular detail level, where, going back to the example, we may not load that level of detail if we're working with an investor as Nexus PMG, but when we are aligned with a contractor and we're tracking at an atomic level, or even let's just say at a drawing level for every isometric, we have to be able to take off the hangers, the pipe, the number of welds, and load all of that system into our progress tracker. That the system gives us affords us the ability to load both of those different levels of detail into the system and be able to track them, as well as aggregate them back into our budgeting structure. And so what we call those commitments and expenditures are our cost items. And so one of the biggest questions I get as we think about actuals is, how can we integrate? And so it's usually a really great question. I'll address it before I go any deeper. Is Cloud EPC continues to play nice with Excel in almost every grid you see. So just like I showed you on the original budget, where you can download that data, you can populate a template and you can import it in. We do that with our commitments and our expenditures as well. And so you can download the template, you can populate that template from an extract out of your accounting system, let's say, and you can populate that template and import it into the system. We've also have done integrations via what I'll call the CSV handoff process, where a enterprise client maybe wants to run every night or every 12 hours, let's say, an extract out of their accounting system in, quite frankly, the same format that is our Excel file. We can load that onto a secure FTP or some sort of methodology through email, and we can process those files every night. And so we can be essentially out of sync 24 hours with your accounting system. The other way we work is we do have a private API, and we can create integrations directly with accounting systems. And we have recently also partnered with third-party integrators, and specifically if anyone is using Viewpoint or Spectrum, which is the other application, we have an off-the-shelf third-party connector that we can actually utilize to integrate with your existing accounting system into Cloud EPC. For the purposes of this, I won't really be talking about how do we get data into the system. Just know there's lots of different ways through enterprise implementations on how we can connect our system from a project budgeting system to your existing enterprise accounting systems. And so from there, we have and store these data points in a couple of different views. And the one that is the most obvious is this purchase order, or we load some contracts here as well, where we have a formal commitment. And so, for example, in this case, we're going to go out and we're going to be buying a pump, or we're going to be subcontracting a foundation. There's typically paper that goes with it, and when those contracts are signed and that paper is signed, we have created a formal commitment or a purchase order or subcontract that has commitment line items. And that's what we're looking at here in this three-part view is we are creating a commitment to Caterpillar on November 28th, 2017 that has to get cost coded. And so in this case, we're cost coding it to underground pipe. And that commitment was for $15,000. If there's any expenditures or invoices that came in against it, those show up on the third grid. And so I'm going to go to this ABB example where we've created purchase order number 906-855A to ABB. There's a single line item, which is the instrument tray, and we've been invoiced 3 times. And so you can see in this example, we have a total commitment of $105,000. We've been invoiced and created expenditures in the system for 3 individual invoices. We can also deal with multiple commitment line items. So a subcontract maybe has a design element, a element, and a construction element, as this example shows. So we're subcontracting a portion of work to GE, but when we go create that commitment to them or that subcontract to them, we're able to isolate and cost code it to our budget. So the engineering, procurement, and construction scopes of work are all separated. And in this case, GE has invoiced us invoice number 5451B for a total of $5,000. Maybe that's their MOB fee. And so we can see from there how it rolls up. The sum of all the invoices roll up to the commitment line items, which roll up to a purchase order or subcontract level of total commitments and expenditures. You know, all of those cost coding then get rolled up to our budgeting structure and show up as a commitment in the commitment column. And so if we were to go filter on, let's just say material, I don't actually remember the exact line we were looking at, but in this example, here's our GE contract again. We can see that we have this drill down methodology that I was talking about where we have our budgeting. Budgeting in this case is procurement material. That procurement material had an original budget value of $8 million. We've created commitments or signed contracts for $13 million worth of subcontracts, and we have some really nice conditional formatting. In this case, we're formatting the fact that we've created a commitment greater than what's in our budget. This is a really nice way to flag we need to go off and create a trend or a change order for whatever reason. There are settings in the system that will allow you to not create commitments higher than the budget. In this demo account, we've turned that off and we are able to create commitments higher than the budget. So there are business rules that exist and configurations that exist. We often find times, though, that when we're integrating with an accounting system, as this demo account was designed to do, you know, the accounting system is the book of record, and we're not going to want to reject any of those transactions. We'd rather see that those commitment values are higher than what's in the budget and go investigate why and go solve for it either through a trend or a change order or a shift. Being able to drill down is a nice feature as well, so we can go back to that GE by simply clicking that commitment line item, and we'll see that in this case we've filtered down to that exact PO, and we can see those line items along with that $5,000 invoice that came with it. And so that is type 1. It's a traditional commitment. Projects also have, especially on the constructor side, non-PO based commitments, and a great example, the 2 types of those are P cards, for example, or credit cards. You know, need to be able to run down to a Home Depot fairly quickly and put something on a credit card to go get material, for example. That's going to come in as a credit card. You know, even journals fall into that view where we may need to do a journal entry into our accounting system, and there's no necessarily specific purchase order that we can lean on and map that expenditure to. And in Cloud EPC, what we call those is our commit as expend. And so they come in as an expenditure element, like an invoice or a receipt, for example, a true expenditure. So a receipt from Home Depot in this example. And we create the corresponding commitment. And that way, when we roll up to the budget table, we have the commitment that matches the expenditure. And so we call those data elements commit as expend. They're pretty straightforward. There is no commitment value you have to enter. You simply come in, you cost code that value, or you import it in the system. You tell the system what are the total the total amount of cost that is associated with it. You provide any sort of revenue information. So is it material is cost plus 10%, for example, you would apply that 10% markup onto it. And then when it comes into the system and we add that expenditure value, the corresponding commitment value is created in the system. And just like a purchase order and a commitment, it's rolled back up to the budget table, and we can see all of those commitments and expenditures along with the percentage values line up to their appropriate budget account. The third type is payroll. And so while it is very similar to an expenditure, there's other data elements that we like to track us with a payroll record or a labor-based record. For example, we may want to know who the employee is. We may want to know if they were loading our vendor subcontractor hours, what vendor that transaction is associated to. Is it straight time, overtime, double time? What was the date of that transaction? Which, by the way, the expenditure also carries a date. But if we're importing from a time card system, we're going to want to see all of those hours by employee transaction. Or are you going to aggregate that data up and load it in at a higher level every week? The system is malleable enough to handle both of those circumstances. But just like a expenditure account, all payroll is treated as a commit as expend. And so when those expenditures come in and we roll that cost up, all of the labor also has a corresponding, and so here's an example of engineering labor. You'll see that there is the expended value for that labor account matches that committed value. Oh, sorry, the committed value matches the expended value. And in a nutshell, that is the cost module, is being able to manage all of the different costs, being able to find variances and trends through some conditional formatting, and aggregating the cost up to a point where the system allows you to report very quickly out of the system, where you can track your costs at a detailed level and then roll up using the pivoting structure for reporting. We also have the ability to pull in all of the progress tracking and the earned value. So whether we're looking for our earned quantity or we're looking for the earned hours or the performance factor that from our progress module. And I'm going to use that as a transition point to really talk about our progress module next.